الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ به من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم وقال الله تعالى بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد فإن خير الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل بدعة ضلالة. Inshallah, today I will share some of my reflections about xenotransplantation. It's a medical issue which has both religious and bioethical considerations. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Al-An'am, verse number 145, which is basically the basis of this khutbah, inshallah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. قُلْ لَا أَجِدُ فِي مَا أُوحِيَ إِلَيَّ مُحَرَّمًا عَلَى طَاعِمٍ يَطْعَمُهُ إِلَّا أَنْ يَكُونَ مَيْتَةً أَوْ دَمًا مَسْفُوحًا أَوْ لَحْمَ خِنْزِيرٍ فَإِنَّهُ رِجْسٌ أَوْ فِسْقًا أُهِلَّ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ بِهِ فَمَنِ اضْطُرَّ غَيْرَ بَاغٍ وَلَا عَادٍ فَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. And Muhammad Asr's translation is, say, O Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in all that has been revealed unto me, I do not find anything forbidden to eat if one wants to eat thereof, unless it be carrion, dead animal, or blood poured forth, or the flesh of swine, for that, behold, is loathsome. It's Muhammad Asr's translation of the word rich, and we'll talk a lot about that word. Or a sinful offering over which any name other than Allah's has been invoked. But if one is driven by necessity, this is the translation of the word istirar, faman isturra, neither coveting it nor exceeding his immediate need, then know that, behold, thy sustainer is much forgiving, a dispenser of grace. So January 7, 2022 was a landmark day in the history of medicine when a 57-year-old gentleman underwent transplantation, heart transplantation, using pig's heart that had been genetically engineered. This has generated wide-ranging discussion related, as I mentioned, to both religion and issues of bioethics. It is known as xenotransplantation. The word xenos is from the Greek meaning foreign or strange, or a heterologous transplant in which there is transplantation of living cells, tissues, or organs from one species to another. And such cells, tissues, or organs are called xenografts or xenotransplants. There are different kinds of transplantation, including allotransplantation, which is from one individual to another individual of the same species, human beings. Syngenic, which is the twins. Autologous transplantation, which when we use a patient's own blood, stem cells, or bone marrow for transplantation. Just a little bit of its history, brief history of transplantation. The first organ to be transplanted, human organ, was kidney in 1954. Until the early 1980s, the potential of organ rejection limited the number of transplants performed. But medical advances in the prevention and treatment of rejection led to more successful transplants and an increase in demand as well. Today, the US system for organ donation and recovery is among the best in the world. Continuous improvement, more patients in need of organ transplant than ever have received the gift of life. That individual who has donated his or her organ. And even when an organ is available for transplant, graft rejection, which means the patient in whom this organ is transplanted can reject it because of the antibody problem. So it remains an important cause of morbidity and mortality, requiring the use of immunosuppressive agents, which themselves cause many problems, including lymphoma and other cancers. So the first person who received this transplanted heart from a genetically modified pig is reportedly doing well. The procedure was done in Baltimore, Maryland. The transplant team was headed by a Pakistani doctor from Dow Medical College, Muhammad Muhyiddin, who is actually facing a backlash from his own family over religious issues. The patient had been on cardiac support for almost 2 months, and he could not receive a mechanical heart pump because of an irregular heartbeat. And he could not receive a human transplant because he had a history of not complying with the doctor's treatment instructions. So his only chance was either to get a pig's heart or die. The FDA had been delaying an approval for xenotransplantation for a number of years, although this had been done in animals, from one animal to another animal, but FDA was able to actually give a compassionate approval for this patient, and it was done. We'll look at xenotransplantation from the point of view of Islam. I will not go into the details of bioethics because I have no expertise in it, but I will quote from an article on it which is available on the internet. Our religious scholars have been debating transplantation for a number of years. Is it permitted or impermissible? Should it be from a living donor or dead donor? Should it be from a Muslim donor or non-Muslim donor? What about the issue of Muslim recipient or non-Muslim recipient? What's the source of transplant? What about transplants from animals whose meat can be eaten and animals whose meat is forbidden to be eaten? Those are the issues that our religious scholars have been debating forever. Now, let's look at this verse of the Quran. And I will also tell you that the issue of transplantation was discussed by Muslim scholars way before the concept was actually thought about in the West. I can quote it. So the issue that revolves around is this verse that we talked about, that there are several words that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used in this one. The first is the context of this verse. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Ala ta'imin yat'amhu," on the person who is eating if he wants to eat. Okay. And this Surah Al-An'am is a Makkan Surah, probably the middle of Makkan Surah. And some scholars look at this verse and say there are only 4 things haram in Islam, everything else is okay, which is not the case because Islamic State came into being in Medina and then the laws, the further Sharia came. So the things which were impermissible or still impermissible are dead animal, of course, no question, no disagreement among scholars about this. Flowing blood, not the blood which is within an organ like liver and spleen, they are allowed. Then, lahmu khinzirin fa innahu rijs, we'll talk about that. Or an animal which has been slaughtered in the name of someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the Sharia also puts down an exception to the rule. And the exception is a state called istirar, dire necessity, where the only other option is death, certain death. And even then, in exception, there are two strings attached to that. غَيْرَ بَاغٍ وَلَا عَادٍ. Neither transgressing the limits nor becoming habituated to that. So let's talk about it. Now look at the word rijs. It's not najas. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not use the word najas and use the word rijs? In Surah Tawbah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used the word najas. Innamal mushrikuna najas. The mushrikun, the polytheists, referring to the Meccan polytheist, that they are najas, impure, spiritually impure in that sense. But here the word is different. So what does that actually mean? So we'll look at it from the point of view of scholars and try to find something that can help us in dealing with this issue. I hope that none of us is in a situation where we have to choose death or transplant from a forbidden animal. So the question is that is only the meat of pigs forbidden, or the entire animal is forbidden for any use, whether medical or otherwise? Gelatin, insulin, heparin, and heart valves derived from pig have been in use for decades, and Muslims have been using it as well, and scholars have debated back and forth what should be done. Can forbidden things be used for medical purposes? Has a similar issue been discussed by our earlier scholars? So as I mentioned that our earlier scholars discussed this issue in a different context, and I will read it in Arabic first. فَإِنَّ الْمَوْضُ لَيْسَ جَدِيدًا. This topic is not new as far as Islamic scholarship is concerned. عَلَى التَّعَاوُنُ الْفِقْهِ سَوَاءَ الْمُعَاصِرِ أَوِ الْقَدِيمِ. When our faqih, whether modern or ancient, were discussing these issues, فَقَدْ تَكَلَّمَ الْفُقَهَاءُ عَنْ صَلَاةِ الْمُسْلِمِ الَّذِي يَدْخُلُ فِي الصَّلَاةِ وَفِي جَسَدِهِ جُزْءٌ مِّنْ جَسَدِ حَيْوَانٍ نَجَسٍ فَهَلْ يَنْزَوْ عَنْهُ مَا كَانَ مِنْ نَجَاسَةٍ. That if a person is praying and in his body is a piece of organ belonging to an animal which is forbidden, xenotransplantation. You can think it. Centuries ago, our Islamic scholars hypothesized, it's a hypothetical situation. What if it happens? If he's not capable of removing, for example, if you're praying and, just giving an example, don't misunderstand me. Somebody drinks alcohol and is carrying a bottle of alcohol in his pocket and he's praying, he can take it off, he can remove it. But if a piece of organ belonging to an animal who is forbidden is inside the body of an individual, can he pray if he is not able to take it off? Obviously he cannot take it off. The scholars discuss that issue and say it's not in his hands to take it off. The salat is valid. That's one point. Now, the word لَحْمُ خِنْزِيرٍ فَإِنَّهُ رِجْسٌ. The pronoun innahu, indeed it or indeed he. What is this pronoun referring to? Is the reference to the pig itself, or is the reference to the lahmul khinzir, the meat of the pig, pork? If you look at the context, it seems more appropriate it is referring to the lahmul khinzir and not to khinzir itself. Although there is another opinion. So who am I to choose? But if I look at it, I think it's more appropriate to limit it to the lahmul khinzir. But again, the scholars are divided. There are those who said that anything which comes from a pig is haram, including the skin, which cannot be purified by tanning, the hair that cannot be used. But there are scholars who actually have said that you can make even a prayer rug. Yes, there are scholars. And you can use the hair of a pig as well. And in the same way, you can use the heparin, insulin, heart valves, gelatin derived from the pig. So you have a big spectrum and big divergence of opinion on this issue. And when it comes to difference of opinion, then I think a person who is faced with this situation can make a choice and put the trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use this word rijs here and he did not use the word najis? There has to be a reason. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have used the word rijs. And there is this difference of opinion. So the first difference of opinion, is it pig innahu or is it lahmul khinzir innahu? And then comes the rijs. So again, I will quote in Arabic, وَقَدْ دَارَ خِلَافُ الْفُقَهَاءِ حول مدب الكلمة رجس هل معناه النجس أم أن المقصود شيء آخر غير النجاسة ولو كان النجس هل نجاسة هنا تعني نجاسة جسده كله أم أن آدم محددة من جسده هي النجس. For difference of opinion, does the word rijs mean najis, totally impure, or does it mean something else? And if it is najasa, impurity, then is it the entire body or only certain organs? Now I will quote scholar Javed Ahmad Gandhi. You may have listened to him. I was listening to 3 lectures given on this issue. He goes with the meaning impurity najasa. I may disagree with him, but I will give him credit for his methodology and his approach to solving a problem. And I think this is important for our religious scholar. I'm not a scholar, by the way. But when you're dealing with an issue, especially a contemporary issue, which is not directly dealt with in our Sharia, then there has to be a methodology, there has to be a proper approach. And 2 people using the same methodology and same approach may still reach 2 different conclusions. I'll talk about that in a minute, inshallah, at the end of it. So according to him, this najasa is, he quotes that in Islam, siba, which are baha'im or beast animals, which are carnivores, which eat the flesh of other animals, and they have claws, they are forbidden from eating, according to hadith, not in the Quran, but according to hadith. And he said the reason is that when you eat the meat of such animals, it transfers darindagi, uses the word darindagi, darinda, so beastly animal instincts can be transferred by eating the flesh of such animals. That's why Sharia has prohibited, is his reasoning. So what about pig? Pig does not belong to the category of beast. It belongs to the category of cattle because pig farming is also done. And he said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned pig specifically here for the same reason that people would say it's not an animal belonging to the category of beast. But unlike other cattle, pig is carnivorous. So his opinion is that the prohibition of pig is because it is carnivorous, and if you eat the meat, it will spiritually transfer those animal instincts into the person who is eating. So what about putting an entire heart into a human body? So according to him, it is not allowed except in situation of dire necessity. That's his part. But as I mentioned, that the scholars have other opinions as well. And among the other opinion is that the word rich here does not mean najas. It means forbidden, haram. And the detail is, and I have heard this discussion myself from people, again, this is not my opinion, so don't misunderstand me, that rich means najas, and because the pig farming was done in an unclean environment, the pig was feeding on unclean things, its meat was unclean, that's why it was made haram. So if you do farming in a clean atmosphere, feed it clean food, it will not be haram. So you see how the pendulum can swing depending upon what's your mindset and what's your methodology. But if we go with this thing, the rich here means haram, it means pork is haram, no matter how clean, how neatly packaged it is haram according to Sharia. And this meaning can be derived if we apply the word rich to haram without any other qualifying thing that it is because of the impurity, physical impurity or spiritual impurity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said haram, it is haram. But is it just the meat that is haram or any other benefit that can be derived from it? So there has been difference of opinion in the scholars, of Islamic scholars, even earlier Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i and so forth, about the skin and the hair. And according to the Hanafi scholars, there is a hadith that if a dead animal's skin is tanned, it becomes pure and it can be used. Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik, if I remember correctly, have the opinion that the skin of 3 beings cannot be purified and should not be used. First is that of a human being. It may have been done in those days. Allah knows best, because Allah has honored human beings, dogs and pigs. So that's their opinion. Now, the next is istirar. What does istirar mean? So in order to understand that, let's look at a couple of ahadith first. If I'm talking gibberish, please let me know and I'll stop. Okay, so first hadith is that Inna Allah lam yajal shifaakum fima harrama alaykum. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not put the cure for a disease in something which He has forbidden. Which means you cannot cure somebody by using a forbidden thing. Okay, that's one thing. Second hadith, Inna Allah anzala da'a wa dawa wa ta'ala li kulli da'in dawa fatadaw wa la tadaw bi haram. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has basically given diseases, but at the same time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also given the medicine for that. So when you are sick, seek a cure, but do not seek a cure through something which is haram. So the scholar said the hadiths are very clear. If pig is haram, if meat is haram, then how can you use it for medicinal purposes? So how do you reconcile that before we go to the istirar? So there are two words that I want you to be familiar with. One is called ikhtiyar and the other is istirar. Ikhtiyar is when you have an option. So some scholars explain these two hadiths that if you have an option of having a metallic valve, heart valve, then choose that rather than choose a pig valve. If you have the option of a bovine heparin, bovine means derived from the cow, then you can tell your physician, I don't want the porcine heparin which is derived from pork, I want the bovine one. In fact, I can tell you as a doctor that bovine heparin is a blood thinner, it has less side effects compared with the heparin manufactured from pork. No question about it. So again, here you have an option of choosing. So they say this hadith refers to ikhtiyar, where you have an option. But when faman isturra, who is facing a situation of istirar, in that case what should be done? When there is no other option. So the istirar is dire necessity, where the only other option will be that you die. So what should be done? So I will talk about some, our scholars have looked at al-qawaid al-faqihah. These are legal maxims based upon which rulings are given in Islam. And there are several of them. First is ad-dararu yuzal. Harm must be removed. Protection of life is one of the prime objectives of Sharia. If there is harm to the life of an individual, to the life of an animal as well, that harm must be removed by any means possible. Number one. Number two, ad-dararu yudfa'u biqadri al-imkan. Harm should be removed to the extent of possibility. What can be done? You don't have to go, if someone is in fire and you can save the dead individual, just do that. But if you do not know how to deal with the fire, should you jump into the fire? Should you jump into the sea if someone is drowning and you don't know how to swim? It's not imkan, it's within your means to do that. Second is, az-zarar al-ashaddu yuzalu bid-darar al-akhaf. A severe harm can be removed through a lesser harm, which means choosing the lesser of the two evils. So losing life versus using something which is considered to be forbidden to save the life, which option should one choose? Then, al-zarurat tubihul mahdurat. Dire necessity makes permissible what is impermissible in the ordinary circumstances. So those are some of the considerations that as a lay person, when I look at it, obviously I'm not giving any opinion, I'm not qualified to do that. But what if I had the situation where my life is hanging in balance and the only thing that can save me from certain death, again it has to be certainty, and the only thing that can save me from a certain death is transplantation through a pig's heart, what will I choose? It's for everybody else to decide. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولذكر الله أكبر. Now, this is actually just the first step, and I'm sure that people are looking at using other animals, the halal animals, for their organs to be genetically engineered and to be used for human purposes. There are bioethical issues, and as I am not an expert, but there is an article written by Bernard E. Rowland, Ethical and Societal Issues Occasioned by Xenotransplantation. And he mentions 3 issues, which I will just quote. There are 3 sorts of issues associated with genetic engineering and by implication with xenotransplantation. These are dangers associated with the technology, animal welfare issues, and the claim that genetic engineering represents a technology that human beings should not embark upon. Using the hearts of pigs for humans in need of transplant has been a major issue in xenotransplantation. There are dangers associated with such use, such as immunological rejection of the organ, endogenous viruses infecting the recipients, and issues of privacy, distribution of organ, animal welfare, and so on and so forth, as well as some psychological issues, a person living with a pig's heart inside his body. There's something I want to share with you when we are dealing with these issues, religious issues, that an important and a striking feature of the scientific revolution since the 17th century is the scientific attitude of the mind. Now, there was a time, and still there is time, that if a religious scholar says something, you just accept it without questioning it. But the educated scientific mind questions and asks questions. So that scientific attitude of the mind insists on reasoning objectively from facts securely established by evidence. And given adequate professional training in the same field, 2 scientists observing the same physical phenomena are likely to reach the same conclusions about them, no matter what their race, religion, or political creed. This is science. By contrast, when it comes to forming a religious opinion, as I mentioned, different opinions, 2 scholars looking at the same Quranic verse or hadith do not necessarily reach the same conclusion. If there is a consensus on some issue, every scholar agrees with it, then I personally go with the consensus, as I do in my field of medicine as well. But if there is an ikhtilaf, there is a difference of opinion, then I think it boils down to 2 things. First is, and I'm referring mostly to the medical issues, that our religious scholars without proper scientific training should not issue fatwas without first consulting with the experts in that particular field. That's my personal opinion, to which I hold on to, that our scholars should sit down with experts in particular fields, try to understand the complexity of the situation before they can give any fatwa on those issues. I'm not talking about how to pray and how to make wudu. The second thing is that in the end, an individual has to decide what he wants to do. I was having a discussion with someone who is very close to me, and he said that if he was facing this situation, he would rather die than accept transplantation from a pig's heart, with a pig's heart. Again, that's an individual issue, but if somebody decides to do it, he should not be embarrassed, he should not be shamed, he should not be said that, should be told that you will go to hell. Ma'azallah, summa ma'azallah. Because the end of this verse is, Inna rabbaka laghafurur rahim. You know, the verse ends with Inna rabbaka laghafurur rahim, because your Rabb is most forgiving. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put it here? Because Allah knows that human beings will face this situation of what I call istirar, where they do not have the ikhtiyar. And saving a human life is, as I mentioned, one of the prime objectives of our religion. If I made any mistake, may Allah forgive me. I said I'm not giving any fatwa. I'm simply sharing my own reflection on this topic, which has caused some concern to me as well. We will make a couple of du'as. One is for Samir Khan, 17 years old, who is hospitalized with seizures. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cure him. The second is about Sister Bibi Khan, who is sick. And I want to say something about that, because I was told that she belongs to one of the first families of ICB. They helped in establishing this masjid as well. The Quran has a particular term and description for such people. They're called as-sabiqun al-awwalun. The forerunners, the front runners, the pioneers of any community. For them, it's a sadaqah jariyah. But even after they have gone, the good that they have done in establishing a community, a Muslim community, especially in a non-Muslim environment, will continue, inshallah, to give reward to them. So we make dua for the sister Bibi Khan as well as for brother Samir Khan, that Allahumma Rabban Nas Adab al-Bas Ishfi anta shafi la shifa illa shifa shifa la yughadiru saqama. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cure their diseases, give them long and healthy and productive life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give comfort to their family members who are distressed with their illness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if any of our family members are sick, traveling, suffering from anything, unemployment, diseases, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help them relieve all the difficulty that we are facing. Rabbi yassir wa la tuwassir wa tammin bil khair. Ufawwidu amri ila Allah, hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel, ni'mal mawla wa ni'mal nasir. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us to the correct understanding of our religion. Our religion is not isolated. It doesn't tell us to shun this world. It is very much concerned with the day-to-day contemporary issues that we have. And as I mentioned, there is a great need for Islamic scholarship to work in unison with the experts in other scientific fields as well as in financial fields, because there are so many difficulties that Muslims are facing because of the fatwas coming from scholars who are not familiar with these issues. I respect our scholars, but I think there is a need for combined effort. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون وأقيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Make your lines straight.